First, though, a case here in Buffalo argued this morning before the U.S. Supreme Court. This is related back to the Buffalo Billion scandal and the two men that you see on the right there. Our partners at Investigative Post first exposed back in 2014 that a state official, Elaine Caballeros, who you see there, and local developer Louis Simonelli rigged the bidding process so that Simonelli's construction company would get the contract to build a massive plant at Riverbend. It is now the home to Tesla's Gigafactory.
Reporting on the Buffalo Billion scandal stands as some of the most impactful journalism Investigative Post has produced in its 10 years of keeping a watchful eye on the Queen City. In that decade, the state of journalism has faced hardships, layoffs, cutbacks, entire publications folding. But Investigative Post has weathered the storm. Geoff Kelly sat down with editor Jim Heaney to talk about those first 10 years and what's to come. For Investigative Post, I'm Garrett Looker, and this is Reporter's Notebook.
So, Jim, Investigative Post is concluding its 10th year of publishing. What were you expecting when you launched this enterprise?
I can't say there's been any great surprises. I'm not sure if I knew exactly what I was getting into.
I'm not sure you knew exactly
but
what
I knew
you were
I
doing
was. I
either.
knew what I was getting out of, which was an unhappy existence at the Buffalo News. I expected it. I had run businesses before. I used to. I ran a hockey business on the side for 24 years. I started a weekly paper in the Ken Bailey neighborhood when I was like 23 years old. So I kind of had a flair for startups. I wanted to put my ideas into play, and I knew I was going to have to be. I'd have to have my own operation in order to do those things. So I kind of just plowed ahead with, confidence that I could pull it off and would be able to figure things out as I went along.
And how is it shaken out? Give me the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's start with the good.
Well, the good is I think we've established ourselves as a high-quality news outlet. I think we've broken a lot of big stories. The Buffalo Billion scandal is probably the best known of those. We've done a lot of work early on involving lead poisoning that I think has probably saved a lot of kids from lead poisoning, although there's a lot more work that the city needs to do. I think of late we've done really good work on covering the proposal to build the Buffalo Bills a new stadium. I think a lot of the coverage in other news outlets has been of the cheerleader variety. I think we've really done a smart job of tackling the real issues, and
just asking questions. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not so much. It's not so much throwing hand grenades. It's really just asking common sense questions.
Yeah,
right?
Okay, we're going to spend $1 billion. What are we getting in return?
And why? Why are we doing it?
Yeah.
Why are we spending the money to begin with?
Yeah, and I think that underscores I think the role that we've taken on in the kind of media ecosystem, which is being the news outlet that's very independent, very unafraid of asking the difficult questions, seeking the inconvenient truths, if I could quote Al Gore for a minute. So I expected we were going to do good work, and we've met my expectations on that.
All right. Well, that's some of the good. How about the bad?
I think the bad is has been the stonewalling of public officials. It's gotten. I've been around a while.
No, I was just going to say it's not like that's new.
Yeah, but I think it's gotten exponentially worse in the last 10 years. We had a governor, Andrew Cuomo, who just did not believe in the public's right to know. Kathy Hochul is really not much better, if any. City Hall, Byron Brown has been pretty hostile toward anybody who's not friendly toward him. Of late, even Mark Poloncarz has not been easy to deal with. So I think just this growing anti-press sentiment, which is really rooted in contempt for the public's right to know. These politicians think that government is theirs, and it's not. It's ours. And so that's been a real challenge. And it's not just exclusive to Investigative Post. I think reporters in general who have been around a while will agree will agree with me on that. But I think it's been especially tough on us because we are, all we do is investigative reporting. So when we call somebody, they have a pretty good idea that this probably isn't going to turn out.
We're not calling to advertise your church picnic. It's true. I haven't been around as long as you, but I've been around for a while. And one thing that strikes me about the stonewalling is it used to be, if you called an elected official or a department head or what have you, with an uncomfortable story, they might avoid taking your call. They might not call you back. They might refuse to comment. They may refuse to release documents. They may do all those things. Nowadays, they seem to just to deny that the problem even exists. That seems to be like their first step. Their go-to is to claim you're making it up. That's a real change, and it's really hard to deal with.
But it's and I think is newer, younger reporters come to us, and Geoff, you've been with me for a while now. Actually, going all the way back to the beginning, because when you were running Art Voice, that's where we were running our print stuff. And I think some of our younger reporters from coming in from out of the market are a little taken aback at that because it's not this bad in other places.
That's an important lesson to learn.
Yeah.
Right, for people who live here too, it doesn't have to be like this.
Yeah, I mean it's not that way. And Steve Brown from Channel 2, who left about a year ago, I keep in touch with Steve, and he's in Indianapolis now. And we talked on the phone a while back, and he says it's not brutal there the way it is here. It's just there's something about New York State, something about Buffalo, where these politicians just don't want to be questioned, don't want to be scrutinized. Again, government they think is theirs, not ours.
Yeah. Well, that already sounds like the ugly, but let's we've gotten the good and the bad. Let's move on to the truly ugly.
Well, from an Investigative Post perspective, there really hasn't been much ugly. I'm happy to say that I haven't had any major screw-ups. There's been challenges along the way, but we've been able to negotiate all those without a great deal of difficulty. I think if there's something, and I don't know if ugly's maybe too strong of a word, but I think the media landscape here in town has certainly taken a turn for the worse. The Buffalo News has downsized a lot. I mean, when I left the news in 2011, the newsroom had about 145 people in it. They're down to less than half of that. I think with accounting management, they're at about around 70. And there's been a huge cutback in coverage, really everything but sports. Sports is mushroomed. Because that's what gets the traffic on their website. But there's been just massive cutbacks in coverage.
And a decline in circulation and distribution as well.
Yeah. The paper now, actually the paper right now sells, I can't speak to their digital circulation, so to speak. But print-wise, the paper, Channel 2 and Channel 4, get as many viewers on their 6 o'clock news as the daily paper sells print copies. 55,000 a day, and the news used to just dominate. So you've got the daily paper on the decline. The TV stations are also losing audience, but not nearly as rapidly, and they're in better shape financially.
And we have a long-standing and very valuable partnership with Channel 2.
Yeah, which has really helped to put us in the map because, again, we're typically in a 5:30 or 6 o'clock newscast, and that's 50, 55, 60,000 viewers.
So you were a print reporter your entire career up until very early on with Investigative Post.
May 2012.
Yeah,
That's
2012.
My first TV appearance.
You established what has been a really good partnership with Channel 2, with WGRZ. How was that adjustment?
That was a huge adjustment because, being a newspaper reporter, first nobody knows who you are. I used to say
They certainly don't know what you look like.
Yeah, and it was. I can remember telling people when I worked at the news, the only people who care about your byline is your mother and the people you write about.
Right.
Nobody else. You're pretty much anonymous. When I first started at Channel 2, it was great in the sense that in terms of growing a brand awareness for Investigative Post, people know who you are.
Quickly.
People stop you on the street. Yeah. As a matter of fact, the very first time I was on, I left the station and I had to stop at the drugstore on the way home. And it was maybe half an hour after I'd been on the air. And this woman stops me in the aisle of the Rite Aid and says, hey, didn't I just see you on television? It was like immediate. The adjustment, actually TV work is really hard. I came to rather quickly to have a newfound respect for good TV journalism because, if you're a print reporter, it's you and your keyboard, and you don't have to, your biggest worry is the copy desk gonna write a bad headline on your story, and is your editor gonna make you trim more of your story than you want? But you're really in control. Television, you're working. It's much more of a collaborative effort. Your story needs good visuals, which means your camera person needs to be on the ball. A lot of people don't like going on camera, so it's more of a challenge to get people, especially with investigative reporting. It's just much more labor intensive. Transcribing interviews. It's just very hard work, and Channel 2 was very good to work with in that regard because they got people down there that won tons of Emmys, and Geoff, I'm sure you've had the same experience. I think everybody. I've only hired a couple of people here who had TV experience. For the most people, I'm hiring print reporters because of their reporting skills, and then you learn the broadcasting part of it. What's been the challenge for you?
The challenge is twofold. One is first to take the story into which you've put a fair amount of work, exhaustive research, spent a lot of time writing it and interviewing people, and then to reduce it to its essential elements, right? We're lucky in that Channel 2 gives us 3-4 minutes, sometimes more, to do a story, much longer than the day turns that their staff reporters get, for the most part. But even still, you have to get it to its essential elements, right? And then you have to stand in front of a camera and sell it yourself. Mm-hmm. And that last part in particular, was very difficult for me. It remains sort of difficult. I'm nowhere near as good as their staff reporters are. But once I gave myself over to it, it turns out to be kind of fun. And it's very gratifying, as you say, to reach a big audience and to get feedback on stories from unexpected quarters as a result.
Actually, I'd say a fair amount of the time I actually wind up liking the TV version more than the online version, just because when the visuals are there, and like you say, you got to boil it down to its its essence. It packs a punch. It holds people's attention, and it's actually pretty gratifying. There's less watchdog journalism being done in Buffalo today than there was certainly when I was at the Buffalo News. You know, back in the day, so to speak. There wasn't a full-time investigative reporting team of half a dozen people, and so we've got and actually just talking about the turnover. I mean, I've been running Investigative Post for 10 years now. You take all the news directors and editor-in-chiefs in town, collectively have less than 10 years in the job because there's just been so much turnover.
That's wild.
Yeah.
To think of.
Yeah, I'm literally the graybeard.
You're the longest
but
tenured editor.
but I'm figuratively, the same. So, and that's not a good development in terms of the kind of decline of local media, because that's how the public finds out what people in power are doing. And there's fewer reporters covering the same number of politicians, spending more and more of our money, and the less scrutiny, the more opportunity there is for misconduct. And
as I don't need to tell you, I came from 20 years of working for alt weeklies, editing alt weeklies, mostly here, a little bit in Pittsburgh. 10 years in aggregate at Art Voice, and then 4.5 years with the Public. And now there's nothing. There is no alt weekly in town. And
why is that? Why is that?
Because for the same reason, many of the same reasons that daily newspapers are shrinking. That the print advertising model is just not sustainable anymore for a variety of reasons. The value of print advertising is not as clear to advertisers as it once was. That distribution method is expensive. Printing is expensive. I mean, what drove the Public, one of the many factors that drove the Public out of business was a huge increase in the price of printing. And alt weeklies, scrappy little alt weeklies that are bomb throwers, that like to disrupt civic conversations. Our margins are so paper thin that just the slightest disruption in the business model was fatal.
Yeah.
And it's happening across the country. Cities, especially mid-sized cities like Buffalo, are losing those alternative voices, which again creates an opportunity for not-for-profits like Investigative Post.
Yeah. Well, what's also happening with media, and it's happened here, and it's happening across the country, is the so-called legacy media, television and newspapers, are now owned by corporate chains headquartered far, far away. It's getting tougher for those outlets because in the case of the news, there's just a lot fewer people. In the case of TV, their staffs are being asked to produce more and more content. So they're stretched thin. But, everybody's doing the best they can. But it's, the good old days the good old days might have never been quite as good as people would have thought, but they were certainly better than they are now for the legacy outlets.
Yeah.
And we're chugging along. I mean, we're unlike most of the rest. We're growing. Our audience is growing. Our staff is growing. Nonprofits. When I started Investigative Post, there were only about 4 or 5 dozen nonprofits in the whole country. News nonprofits, that is. Now, I think there are over 400. So it's definitely a growing trend. We can't take the place of a television station or a daily newspaper. I mean, we've got 4 reporters, hopefully soon to be 5, but that's not a ton of people. What we can do is fill a niche, and that niche being investigative and analytical reporting, which tends to be one of the first things that gets cut when in the face of all this economic decline, because that's expensive. When I was at the news, there were reporters that are producing 300 or 400 stories a day. I mean, a year. I was doing 50, maybe 100, but I was doing the deep dive kind of stuff. And, when money gets tight, what goes? The work that you get 100 stories a year out of, or the work that you get
Right.
400 stories a year
Right.
out of?
How much space are you filling
Yeah,
in the paper?
yeah. And now there's the dynamic of clicks.
Yeah.
So the Buffalo Bills get a lot of coverage because they generate a lot of clicks. Is that good for the community at the expense of local journalism? No, it's not. But that's
Yeah.
but that's the way it is.
Well, that's an interesting question. So Investigative Post is a not-for-profit, so we're not looking at advertising revenue. Certainly, we're measuring like the attention given to a story. But how do you, as the executive director and the editor, how do you measure the success of a story, of the institution?
I think the impact it has out there. A good example, obvious example, is the Buffalo Billion. It got the attention of federal prosecutors. They brought charges. They got convictions. People went to jail. That's kind of at the extreme end. But I think in a lot of cases, we're able to move the needle. People pay attention to something because it gets reported. And most of what we do are stories that would not have been reported otherwise. So its impact is and it's nice when a story gets a lot of traffic. But I don't really judge stories based on traffic. I know a good story when I see it.
That's lucky for me, listeners, because nobody reads my stories.
Oh, stop it. Stop. Actually, you've had some of the best. Your stuff on racism in the police department got a healthy audience.
You got a few views.
Yeah.
So 10 years down, how does the second decade start? What do you have in store?
Well, after the Tops massacre back in May, I made a decision that we needed to double down on coverage of urban affairs reporting. We've done a lot over the years: lead poisoning, police misconduct. But I wanted to really focus on issues that are the root cause of racism and poverty in this community. And so what we've done is I've hired a reporter, Ijaz Jasil, who is focused on housing in the city. We brought on board Garrett, who is spending a portion of his time on city schools and root causes of segregation, ongoing
Right.
root causes of segregation. And I've raised a critical mass of money that will allow us to hire a criminal justice reporter, hopefully in the first quarter of the year. So we're going to be doubling down on coverage that gets to the root of problems, not just doesn't report about the symptoms, but trying. And I think I think our role is really important, because when you look at the coverage resulting from the Tops shooting, there was a lot of coverage around the shooting itself, but the coverage of the black community has really not changed in most of the other outlets. They're still going about business as usual, and we're really trying to do something that's, I think, a lot more aggressive, a lot more in depth, a lot more ambitious. So I think I think that, combined with what Dale Shoemaker's doing on the economy, which is going to have an element to it as well. I think we're going to keep focusing on what we focus on. We do a lot with politics, with the economy, urban affairs. We're going to just keep digging hard at the core issues that we're, with 4 or 5 people, we can't be all things to all people. What we can do is we can take certain topics and kind of own them. And I think we've done a good job of that. And, as we raise more money, we'll continue to hire more reporters and provide more coverage. So, I'm hoping in the next couple of years, we'll continue to add staff, expand coverage, and continue to be. I think we're an important part of the ecosystem here, because what we're doing more of is what everybody else is doing less of, and I think what we do